Terror, the politics of fear. From the BBC in London, a series of 4 programmes on terrorism, presented by Professor Paul Wilkinson.
The technology of terror. In this, the final programme in our series, I'll be looking at the latest weapons available to terrorists and how this will affect future terrorist actions. Surface-to-air missiles soaring off towards their target. Too cumbersome a weapon for terrorists in the past, but what about the future? Ian Hogg is the weapons expert of Jane's Defence Weekly.
In the past, the missiles for air defence, as you heard from that one, have been enormous things which you carted around on lorries, and a lot of them still are if you want range. But about 20 years ago, it became possible to put a missile on a man's shoulder, largely because of microelectronics, which enabled them to build small controlling circuits. Given one of those, a terrorist can dominate an airport. He can knock down anything that's coming into an airport. He can do an immense amount of damage.
Wealthier terrorist groups and those with state sponsors can now gain access to much greater firepower. For example, the shipload of weapons on board the Exxon, intercepted by the French customs in October 1987, included surface-to-air missiles and anti-tank guns, as well as a large quantity of plastic explosive.
Plastic explosive is very much like plasticine. You can mould it. You can conceal it quite easily. I mean, you can roll it in a flat sheet and stick it in the middle of a book, or you can make it into a little Dresden shepherdess and paint it and pop it in your luggage, and there you are. If you wanted to blow a car up, for instance, very neatly you'd demolish that motor car with half a pound of plastic if you knew what you were doing and you applied it properly.
Since plastic is difficult to detect, there's always the danger that someone will develop an all-plastic gun. As yet, there isn't one on the market, but in a high-tech age, virtually anything is possible. The question is, will terrorists make use of high technology?
People have the wrong impression when they talk about terrorists and technology. The high technology that terrorists regularly use now and can use in the near future can be purchased in any hardware store, toy shop, electronics boutique.
Brian Jenkins, who directs the RAND Corporation's research into political violence.
There are a variety of devices, for example, that allow one to detonate explosives in a variety of ways, and some of these have, in fact, been used by terrorists. For example, simple delay timer switches. These can be set to provide a delay ranging from a few seconds to several days or weeks, depending on your power source and the sophistication of the device. We're talking about devices that cost a few dollars. Another type of device would be those that are set off by light. There's a device here. It's used primarily as an anti-burglary device. When I have my hand over it and blocking the light, it doesn't make any noise. We open, the light hits it. The same circuit can be attached to a bomb so that when somebody lets light into a room or opens a drawer, the bomb is detonated. This other device here is used frequently by terrorists in preventing their bombs from being tampered with or dismantled by bomb squads. It's a simple mercury switch. This one here costs $1.19. It's used, for example, in the lid of a washing machine so that when you lift the lid, the washing machine turns off. When you close the lid, the washing machine turns on. Basically, it's a little glass vial filled with mercury, and the mercury slops up and down and either completes the circuit or breaks the circuit. Now, this thing here is a common toy, a very popular toy now in the United States, a radio-controlled car. Basically, it's a tiny transmitter that emits a low-power signal to the vehicle. As you see here, there are 2 small servo motors, one to make the thing turn right or left, the other to make it go forward or backward at a certain speed. These are used in model cars. They're used in radio-controlled aircraft. They can be used in radio-controlled boats. Some of these radio-controlled airplanes, by the way, can get quite large. They go up to 1/3 scale. For example, if you take a British Spitfire, there are toy versions of that run up to a wingspan of approximately 12 feet and would have a capacity of several hundred pounds of explosives in terms of being able to deliver that size of a bomb.
What that bomb is made of also worries some people. Could it be nuclear? Dr. Neil Livingston, who advises the American government on terrorism, doesn't think that's possible yet. He's perhaps unduly sanguine on that point, but mention chemical or biological weapons to him and his response is very different.
Intelligence organizations say that by the end of the century, we'll have 50 nations that have chemical or biological weapons capability. This is the poor man's atomic bomb. And so we're concerned, on the one hand, that that technology is going to filter down to groups which are sponsored by some of the nations involved in this arms race today. But secondly, we're looking at a technology that is available to single individuals or to small groups of individuals today.
In his latest book, America the Vulnerable, Dr. Livingston says that the materials required to make chemical and biological weapons are already available for industrial uses.
And it's my contention, and that of my co-author, Dr. Douglas, that a single individual in the privacy of their home or their garage could develop a weapon of mass destruction of a chemical or biological nature using declassified sources of information, using readily available materials, and do so with no more risk to themselves than refining heroin and no more magnitude of difficulty than brewing beer at home.
In spite of some 70 documented incidents involving chemical or biological agents in recent years, Dr. Livingston says the U.S. government is not prepared to meet this threat.
A few years ago, a 55-gallon drum containing a white powder fell off a truck going over the Oakland Bay Bridge, and it scattered this white powder over the bridge. It took them 9 hours to determine that the white powder was talcum powder. And if it takes us 9 hours to do things like that, we can imagine how much damage could be done to the environment or to human beings if that had been a chemical or biological agent.
But would a terrorist be prepared to use such a lethal chemical or biological weapon of mass destruction? Brian Jenkins thinks not.
There is a question here in terms of self-imposed constraints, at least on the parts of groups that see themselves as having some kind of political objective. Now, the ability to destroy the population of a major city may appeal to some madman in an asylum somewhere, but mayhem is not in itself the objective of most terrorist groups.
Neil Livingston, though, sees little self-restraint being exerted by some terrorist groups at the moment.
I don't think that when you take over or blow up a jetliner, for example, with people of various nationalities and backgrounds, that is a very discriminate way of sending your message. I think terrorists today are doing exactly the same thing, except on a lower level.
There's also pressure on terrorists to escalate their efforts.
A hijacking goes away very quickly, and when the issue is resolved, the public loses interest in it. I think terrorists today realize they have to do more than ever before to send their message.
But using a chemical weapon would be self-defeating, according to Brian Jenkins.
The point is that the bomb is used as a coercive instrument. A succession of bombs is a campaign of coercion. Whereas, if you once set in motion, say, one of the horrendous biological scenarios, even if the government were to yield to your demands, you can't stop it. And therefore, there is absolutely no incentive on the government to yield to those demands.
But then Dr. Livingston says that a biological attack could be both devastating and confined.
Our skyscrapers today are basically hermetically sealed. Our windows don't open. So once you put something into the ventilation system, it keeps on recirculating within the building, and you turn a major building into a slaughterhouse.
Perhaps the biggest restraining influence on terrorists, though, is, as Brian Jenkins suggests, fear of too severe a backlash at such an horrific action.
You don't poison the city's water supply in the name of the Popular Front and expect to remain the Popular Front for very long. And they worry that some extreme action or extreme threat will provoke unprecedented government crackdown.
Rather than clamping down after the event, though, a lot of work is being carried out into prevention. Dr. Richard Clutterbuck is an expert on the latest developments. He told us there are several new detectors under trial which will alert the operators to the presence of explosive, plastic or otherwise. But we also need to be able to identify terrorists themselves.
What is needed is some good means of preventing impersonation And I think that needs to be both on identity cards within a country and on passports for travelling. And the Germans are, in fact, introduced in 1987, they introduced a machine-readable Euro passport with data which can activate the machine on the person's passport, and also the machine-readable identity cards.
Someone, of course, could just steal a card or passport, so some new method of sure identity is needed.
The next stage is to get a means of positive identification of the individual by measuring things about him which are unique to him, of which the first and obvious one is the fingerprint. Now, with two methods of fingerprint matching, it can be done in a few seconds. One, which I've had demonstrated it to me, and fingerprint is placed in a slot and it's screened by a light. And the data of that fingerprint are recorded digitally on a computer. And if the person is duly enrolled in his fingerprint reading is on that computer, if he then comes in and seeks the entry which is authorized to him, to the person with that finger, he can then plant it on that thing, and it was 4 seconds to confirm that I was the guy whose fingerprint was authorized.
Dr. Clutterbuck says computers could be invaluable in rapidly identifying known criminals. They could also contain enough basic information about people to identify possible terrorist connections which could then be investigated. Initially, though, such high security measures are only likely to be used inside government buildings. Brian Jenkins emphasizes that tougher security measures can also lead to unpleasant side effects.
By these security measures, which are necessary, what we do in many cases is displace the risk. We can make it more difficult to plant bombs in certain places. But, as we've seen a number of times in Europe, for example, in recent years, terrorists then start setting off bombs in department stores and cafes and discotheques. The fastest growing target category that we have seen in the 1980s are bystanders. They're not in any way connected to the struggle. They just happen to be people who are in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Stringent anti-terrorist laws and increased surveillance affect the general public and are naturally resisted in democratic countries by people anxious to protect their civil liberties. But Dr. Neil Livingston points out that security professionalism and good planning may help reduce the risks to civil liberties.
The one thought I would leave you with is that societies overreact most often when they are unprepared for something. And when societies are well prepared and we have professionalism in the way that we respond, we can deal with a problem like terrorism without submitting to the too often, temptation to become like the terrorists themselves. It's only when a country is attacked by terrorists and flounders for a while that the people suddenly stand up and say, we're willing to do anything, government, but just take care of us, protect us. We'll give up anything for that. I think that's the danger.
Yet countries such as Italy and West Germany have shown that major terrorist campaigns can be defeated without sacrificing democracy and the rule of law. That should give us heart. This is Professor Paul Wilkinson at the BBC in London.